Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Tapping the Wine Cellar. I'm Margaret Hike. I'm the Director of Communications for the Missionaries of the Precious Blood, Kansas City Province. You can learn more about the Missionaries of the Precious Blood at our website, preciousbloodkc.org. Today, Father Keith, Vicki, Tim, and I are absolutely thrilled to have Sister Mumbi Kigutha, Precious Blood sister, with us. Sister Mumbi lives in Chicago and works with the Jesuit Refugee Service. And with that, I am going to turn things over to Father Keith to start us off.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to have you with us again. We have a very challenging set of readings for us today from Matthew 10 as a gospel. And Matthew 10 is Jesus' orientation session for disciples about ready to hit the road. He's telling them what to expect and what their priorities should be. And he's told them that they're going to run into opposition. And he's telling them now that he is their first priority. Now, in their times, family had the same authority over a person that a ruler would have. So if one of these guys was on the road and like their father came up and said, no, you need to come home now, forget this stuff, they would be honor bound to follow their father. But Jesus is saying, I come first. The mission comes first. And I think that's an important point to make. For me, it kind of reminds me a little bit about a poker player going all in. You're supposed to go all in for Jesus. I know it's easy to manipulate that, and that's almost too heavy. But I think Jesus has to come first in our lives, and sometimes we kind of want to hedge our bets. The second half of the gospel reading talks about how they'll get hospitality, and the hospitality they receive will get blessings for the people that offer it. This is reinforced by the first reading, where the prophet Elisha is taken in by a prominent couple in a marginal Jewish village, and that couple is having some issues, and that couple is going to be blessed with a son. They're childless, which is considered a curse at the time, with a son because they've given the prophet a place to stay, a furnished room, which is really above and beyond normal hospitality. So that's my initial take. Mumbi, what are your thoughts about these readings?
I think I'm especially struck by the whole aspect of hospitality. We are living at a time where people are displaced and people are seeking new homes. And the call for us, as we who have been blessed with so much, is to open up our spaces and welcome the other, the neighbor. And it's easy to think of a neighbor when they are like you and they look like you and have similar values, but it's a bit harder when they're so different. But I also like to think of it as the other aspect of hospitality, which is receiving it. Whenever we look at people as we welcome them into our homes, it is easy to get stuck on what we are doing for them. I think the question to ask as Christians is, what are they doing for us? What values are they bringing to us? What beautiful gifts of their culture are they bringing to us? When we look at the church right now in America, the Catholic Church in America, the pews are changing. The skin color of those on the pews is changing radically. And even as we welcome them, we have to look at the past and look at who has not been welcomed and who still feels excluded. And I'm talking about our Black and brown brothers who have been here for a longer time. I'm talking about the LGBTQ community. And look at the richness that they bring to us. When we talk about a global church, it means welcoming everybody.
I think, Mumbai, you brought up, I love the idea of hospitality. And I think the opposite of hospitality is fear. And right now, I think the gospel for me this week, one of the lessons is what the woman showed us in the gospel. because she not only opened her doors and fed the people in front of her, she gave trust. She put down that barrier of anxiety, that barrier of the stranger in front of her, and she had trust. And in that trust, she was able to go into a deeper embrace, a deeper reality of a relationship with the Lord standing in front of her, which I think is what we're called to do. It's not that casual quickie, so to speak, but what's that deeper relationship? And we can only do that when we trust. And I am especially challenged sometimes to be able to receive, because we learn we're supposed to care for others. You know, that's what society teaches us. But I love how you talked about, no, the gift also is the gift of receiving that love from others. Tim D, what's on your mind for today?
So I've got a couple of things that are very similar to what everybody's talked about. Father Keith, I must disagree with you. I feel like these are pretty easy readings to go off of. So I found them very good, so fun. I can imagine that getting up in a pulpit and trying to preach on this would probably be a little more difficult. But you know, if I'm going to sit here and be in front of a camera in my basement, you know, this is nice and easy as can be. So like everybody else, I picked up on the theme of hospitality, and then also what it takes to be a disciple, which I feel like everybody's kind of touched on as well. Father Keith, mentioned the point of both the first reading and the gospel, talking about hospitality and how hospitality is an important part of living a loving life devoted to God and others. And in the gospel readings, it kind of talks about how hospitality is hard, and when done at its best, it is done with some sacrifice. And so I feel like that, the two parts of the gospel where, Jesus is talking about the difficulty of being, the challenges that come with being a follower of him, a disciple of his, kind of ties together with that theme of hospitality. Is when it's done well and done right, it is a sacrifice, it should be it should be a sacrifice. And it's not just out of our abundance. And I think Sister Mumbi had talked about this, in our prep meeting the other day, is that, this is something that we need to do out of, what we base our lives off. It should be generous. And we should be generous and welcoming others. And it's really hard to do, especially in a culture like ours that really does teach us to accumulate and consume. And I was reading in American Magazine the reflection for this weekend, which was written by Dr. Jamie Waters from DePaul University. She wrote that belief is not passive or easy. It is our active engagement with God and community. And we have to be willing to give generously, to follow and emulate Jesus, to be willing to put aside our own selfish wants in order to love others more. And as I thought about these two things, I thought about the story of the guy in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago, who was in the midst of protests. The police had hemmed the protesters in and two different sides, and were, there was tear gas and other projectiles that were being shot at these people. And this man welcomed 70 people into his home, sheltering them from, what was coming, which was arrest, tear gas, which I hear is not a lot of fun. He took a lot of risk in doing that. That was something that that's a lot of sacrifice that he took on for him and his family, that he's welcoming 70 people into his home. And out of 70 people, you're probably going to find one or two who aren't there, for the best reasons. And you also take the risk of the police coming down on you for sheltering them. You take the risk of possible exposure to the virus. And, I felt like that was that's what kept coming back to me as an example of someone being, really being hospitable, out of, with great generosity.
I think the people who show the gift of hospitality to me are also the ones who don't worry about the rewards. Like that man in Washington, he welcomed the stranger, and he didn't do that because he wanted to be on CNN, and he didn't do that because he wanted to be, he did that out of compassion. So he didn't worry about the rewards.
Yes. And in some ways, I think this is an extension of Matthew 25, where Jesus says, "Have you done for the least of my children, you've done for me, least of my brothers." It reminds me of the old Benedictine story of the Benedictine guest master getting up in the middle of the night with the knocking on the door and saying, "I'm coming, Jesus, I'm coming, Jesus." We are called to treat others as we would treat Christ, and that means everybody. We don't get to qualify that. And unfortunately, in America, we like to qualify that. We like to qualify that very much.
When you talk about family, in the first reading, we forget that we are also baptized into a family of believers. And we are supposed to hold each other accountable when we fall short. This is the main work of the family. And in a world where we want to be judged on individual merit, I'm sorry to say that we are responsible when we occupy spaces where some people are excluded and we are quiet about it. If we occupy churches where our Latinx sisters and brothers are relegated to the basement for mass, we are complicit. In churches where we only want to see migrant bodies during the once a year festival and say we can say we enjoyed their food and their dressing, we are complicit. When reverse missionary activity is happening and so many of us from other parts of the world are coming, and all you can hear is that we don't understand their accents, let me tell you something. When they came from Europe and America to our countries, we didn't understand their accents either. But here we are. When our life of discipleship becomes too easy, you need to ask yourself why. We were not called or baptized into an easy life. There should always be something working as sandpaper, smoothing out your rougher edges so that we can attain this perfection that God calls us to. So when God says that I came to give you abundant life, imagine what your idea of abundant life is and desire that for everybody in the world. And talking about hospitality, the most generous form of hospitality I have enjoyed is in refugee camps and settlements, where you find 8 to 7 people living to one room, and it's not even a permanent structure. Sometimes it's just a tent, and then finding their best cup or glass to offer me water, throwing together their coins so they can buy me something to accompany this, water, knowing that some people in that family have not eaten anything that day, yet they keep on giving. And I think when we look at the disparities of the world in terms of wealth and possessions and what we have, and in this time of COVID, when everybody is struggling to an extent, let me not say everybody, there's a 5% in this world who can afford to feed the rest of us until time immemorial. But when we're all struggling, it's very easy to buy into a scarcity mentality. And that is not the spirit of God. That does not come from God. Because everything we already have is gift from God. We did not deserve it. We did not earn it. So we need to remember that everything that is given to us is not just for our benefit. We are the hands and feet of Jesus. It's for us to spread this lagis to other people so that they can also go to bed a little less anxious about their health, their education, the roof over their heads, the food in their bellies.
I'm going to jump in. I threw out a question that's asked, how do we show hospitality during this time of COVID when we are so separated? And Pat Large, who is one of our companions at St. Charles in Ohio, says, I find that one has to be creative in finding ways to welcome and reach out to others during COVID-19. Most of all, though, I find I need to be a more attentive listener. In that way, I am open to receive the person as they are and where they are. It becomes about the other and not about me. So, Pat, thanks for joining in the conversation.
Yeah, Pat, thank you for that. That was wonderful. And that's a really important part of hospitality that I don't think that a lot of people, really highlight. That, when you go into somebody's house or welcome into somebody else's space, that or you're welcoming others into your own space, that there's an important part of really listening and hearing their stories, and then also who do you invite, who are you inviting into your space, and then how do you listen? Do you really listen to them? Do you listen to their stories? Do you listen to their truth? Do you listen when somebody says, I'm a victim of racism, I have to deal with this on a daily basis? Do we hear that? And really paying attention to hearing how other people's lives are chipped away at, their dignity is chipped away at, their by other people and systems that don't value their experience or downplay what their experience has been.
One of my favorite things that I read about it when I was looking at this gospel was the idea that the Christian community at the time this gospel was written believed that when they welcomed the stranger, they not only welcomed that person, they welcomed that clan, that family where that person came from. So by extension, and again, Mombi, I think you're going to just be a permanent member of this panel. When you talk about being we're part of the baptized people, the people of God, and God lives within us. So when you welcome the stranger in front of you, whether they're baptized or not, let's just talk about humans. When you welcome the person in front of you, you are welcoming God in front of you. And so we should be horribly ashamed of how we treat the stranger, because we're not recognizing the presence of God standing in front of us.
Talking about hospitality, depending on what news channel you watch, there was so much that was put out there about the protests. I attended several protests, I think 7 or so. But what struck me is the ability of this young generation that we have judged so harshly. We have said all kinds of things about them, that their noses are always stuck to their devices. But guess what? They use these devices to rally and come together, strangers, and created protests within 24 hours. And people are volunteering their expertise, but also along the way, they were just showing up. People opening their trunks with refreshments, for the marchers. It also struck me that we have also come under this false idea that leaders have to be elected. What I saw with the young people were them electing themselves as leaders. Like, this is what I have to offer and bring in it. And for me, this is a true humility, knowing your gifts and presenting them to the world. And I saw church like I've never experienced out there. Creating space, amplifying voices of people who we have not been listening to. And what struck me constantly when I was out there was the need for us as a body of faith to apologize for not teaching the right Christian values and not practicing them. And this is why our pews are devoid of young bodies and faces. We have refused to engage in difficult conversations with them. We have refused to welcome all of them, no matter how many times in the Bible Jesus says, let them all come to me. So what have they done? They have created church. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there Christ is. And that's where they are. And that's where Christ is. He was out on those streets.
I wish to agree with Mumbi about our young people. My experience of young people is they are much more committed to justice and much more committed to seeing things done right and seeing the world healed. And in many cases, I was just thinking, when they offer hospitality, they're not offering out of excess generally. Our young people are under a lot of financial stress most of it that has been loaded on them by our generation, unfortunately, for no good reason. I mean, I don't know what people are, well, we won't go into that, what people are thinking that make them be in that kind of debt. It's manipulation, but we don't need to talk about that. It amazes me how many people of my generation really would like to talk about defending Christianity, unfortunately, and how they'll go to the mat, and yet they won't live Christianity as in welcoming the stranger. You can't defend and welcome. It just doesn't work together. And Christianity does not need to be defended. Christ is here. Christ will always be Christ. No one's going to tear Christ down. No one's going to discredit Christ, really, who understands Christ properly. We don't need to arm ourselves to protect some in some ways pagan culture of materialism and abundance and sacred sanction for accumulated wealth.
And I'm going to echo what both Moonby and Father Keith talked about with the young people. You know, I know with our volunteers, well, a lot of them have been for a lot of our current, well, our two current and our former volunteers have been very active in the protests. And I'm astounded every time I meet with our volunteers, even before that, of, their willingness to commit to living out their faith by being with other people and hearing their stories and getting the opportunity to walk with people and knowing that that's part of that hospitality. Their time as precious blood volunteers is a time for them to really hone that skill of listening to others and being with other people. And a lot of times people who are really struggling, like our two volunteers who served this last year, who were working with people who are at a free healthcare clinic, who see on a day-to-day basis, and hear the stories of people who are frankly not treated well by our healthcare system and especially how we pay for it. So I just want to add on to what Sister Moonby and Father Keith said about, our young people really, being church and being out, following what Christ asked them to do, asked us to do.
I almost wish Gasper was alive today, walking on the earth, running around with that big crucifix of his, because I think he would be in his element in these times of protest, because he would say, this is where church is at. And I think that's one of the gifts of our precious blood spirituality, to challenge us to step away from the fear and welcome the other. And for some people, that's easier than others. I know some of our companions, this is a stretch for them because they grew up in a world of fear. So to all of a sudden to put that down is, there's a lot of anxiety, but they do it, and it's a challenge for them. But yeah, no, I wish Gasper was alive today. I think he would have been thrilled to watch.
Amen to that. I agree with you completely. From my study of Gasper, he would be in his element here, and he probably would be on Facebook every week and YouTube and all of that. He would be everywhere on social media. And I think I've almost forgotten what I was going to say, but I'm remembering what the beginning of last week's gospel, where Jesus says, "Fear no one." And I think that Christianity should give us a freedom from fear. Boy, is that tough. But considering how many people today try to manipulate us through fear, how our culture is manipulated through fear, that really gets in the way of commitment to Christ. Fear does. And I think we need to say that more often.
You know, I was just thinking of a South Sudanese proverb that says, when you walk alone, you walk fast. And when you walk with others, you walk farther. And this is the whole aspect that our faith life was never meant to be lived in isolation. It has to be interrogated through the lens of others. We have to remember that we are created beings with huge egos. And when we want things to work our way, we use our egos to justify. We use the Bible to justify our actions and our choices and our decisions. But the faith community, and do not surround yourself by people who are just like you. I mean, the faith community in all shades and sizes and creeds will help you see and interrogate whether your ideals, your choices are according to what Christ desired. I mean, even Gandhi said, if Christians could live like Christ, I would become a Christian. That means even those who don't understand the Bible well can see we are falling short.
I'm reminded of a story of Gandhi in South Africa, where he came up to a Christian church and told them he wanted to become a Christian. And he had studied the Sermon on the Mount, and he decided that Christianity was the way. And unfortunately, the person at the door told him he was at the wrong church, that his church was across town. His church for colored people was across town. This was not the church for him. And how often do we do that today? Maybe not as explicitly, but how much do we do that with our body language, our attitudes? How much do we do it in the way we present ourselves and who we talk to, who we make welcome?
I'm going to jump in. When Father Keith was talking about Gasper earlier, Jane McNeil, one of our companions, jumped in and said, Saint Gasper can be alive today through us. We can be one of the 1,000 tongues that he spoke about. So we're called to live that life. Does anyone else have any other things they want to throw in there? We're about at our half-hour mark today. No? Okay, so it's time to wrap up. I'm going to give it to Father Keith to start our wrap up.
All right. I'll go back to the first part of the gospel reading. Jesus says, don't let any other priority sidetrack you. Don't let any other standard come between you and the gospel. The gospel comes first. The gospel always comes first.
Vicki?
I got to end with my new favorite phrase that I learned today, which is let us walk farther with others.
Tim?
You know, one of the things I didn't talk about earlier was part of hospitality is also receiving it, and I think often of these sisters who are from Japan, who I met while I was in Nepal, and Nepali culture is over the top with generosity. You know, in fact, it was kind of an insult if you didn't take to the host if you didn't take seconds. And the first were always this big plate of rice with curry or whatever else, and very generous. And the sisters, you know, understood that this was something that part of hospitality is receiving it from someone who is generously giving it. And they would always, every time they would take a bite of their seconds and they were full, they would say, "This is for you, Jesus. This is for you." So they were giving of themselves by stuffing, overstuffing themselves. So they were being generous by receiving.
And last but not least, certainly not least, Sister Moonbi.
I feel like I have to give a shout out to Mother Bruna, who's the founder of the Sisters of the Precious Blood, because there's a lot of same gasp going on today. But Mother Bruna was renowned for hospitality. She baked bread and gave it to anybody who needed it. There's another founder who I also count as one of my founders because I used to belong to that congregation, the Missionary Sisters of the Precious Blood. And Mother Paula Edmonds would say, "Flexible hearts don't break." So when you think of hospitality, know that your flexibility will not cause you to break. It will just stretch you into wonderful new designs and ways of being.
That is an absolutely beautiful way for us to end today. We're always talking about the challenge of living out the gospel, and I really appreciate that idea of flexibility and that it won't cause you to break. All right, so we want to thank everybody for joining us today. Tapping the Wine Cellar is a presentation of the Missionaries of the Precious Blood, Kansas City Province. We invite you to check out our other media at our website, preciousbloodkc.org/news. If you want to learn more about Sister Moonbi's work at Jesuit Refugee Services, you can check out their website at jrsusa.org. Thanks so much for being with us, and we hope you have a great rest of your week.